The insistent chirp of my satellite phone sliced through the quiet hum of the lab, a jarring intrusion at this hour. I'd been hunched over a series of freeze-dried tissue samples from a Peruvian ice mummy, charting the degradation patterns, the delicate dance of desiccation and cellular collapse. My world, usually one of meticulous, quiet observation, was about to be upended. "Blake here," I answered, my voice a little rough from concentration. "Dr. Raj Blake?" The voice on the other end was clipped, authoritative, and laced with an unmistakable urgency that immediately put me on alert. "This is Commander Thorne. I apologize for the late hour, but we have a situation. One that requires your specific expertise, immediately." "Commander, my expertise is in extreme environments, forensic anthropology," I stated, a professional reflex. "What kind of situation?" My mind raced through the possibilities: an ancient burial disturbed by glacial melt, a high-altitude mountaineering accident, something in the unforgiving deserts. Arctic Circle. Remote research station, designated Polaris 7. A sudden, unprecedented thaw cycle has exposed something significant. A previously hidden chamber, buried deep beneath the ice. And inside it, multiple human remains. My breath hitched. Multiple? Mummified? The word unprecedented thaw resonated with a chilling echo of the climate reports I'd been following. This wasn't just a historical find, it was a contemporary anomaly creating a historical problem. Precisely. Mummified. And from initial, very cursory observations, they appear to be remarkably preserved. The station chief on site, a Dr. Anya Sharma, reported at least 4, possibly more. "We need you to assess the scene, supervise the recovery, and provide preliminary analysis." The commander on the line, his voice crackling with urgency, confirmed that once recovered, the remains would be transported directly to the military medical facility restricted autopsy section for comprehensive examination. "Your presence is essential for the initial stages." My fingers instinctively tightened around the phone. This wasn't just a call, it was a summons. The mention of a military facility, the remote Arctic location, the unprecedented thaw, it all pointed to something far beyond a simple archaeological discovery. My reputation as a forensic anthropologist specializing in the unique challenges of cold environments had been forged over years of painstaking work, from Siberian permafrost to Andean peaks. They weren't calling me for a simple identification. They were calling me because they anticipated a challenge, a mystery wrapped in layers of ice and time. "When do I leave?" I asked, already pushing away from my workstation, my gaze drifting to the travel bag usually kept packed for emergencies. "A transport is being arranged for immediate departure. Expect a pickup in 2 hours. Full briefing on the flight." 2 hours. That was barely enough time to grab a proper winter kit, let alone mentally prepare for what awaited me. The Peruvian samples, hours of meticulous work, seemed trivial now. My mind was already racing ahead, picturing the stark, unforgiving landscape of the high Arctic, the biting wind, the endless white expanse. The journey was a blur of cramped military cargo planes and propeller aircraft, each leg pushing me further north, deeper into the realm of perpetual twilight. The world outside the small porthole transformed from scattered city lights to an endless, unblemished sheet of white, punctuated only by the occasional jagged mountain peak, stark against the bruised purple sky. The isolation was palpable, a heavy blanket that settled around me with each passing mile. At the final leg, a twin-engine otter, the pilot, a stoic man with a frostbitten nose, pointed to a faint cluster of lights in the distance. "Polaris 7, Doctor." Not much to look at, but it's home for some poor souls. The research station was a collection of modular structures, painted a dull, utilitarian gray, connected by enclosed walkways. They huddled together against the vast, indifferent emptiness, like a small, beleaguered colony on an alien world. My breath plumed instantly, freezing to the sparse stubble of my eyelashes bundled in a heavy parka, was waiting on the makeshift landing strip. The station chief, Dr. Anya Sharma, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that betrayed a deep exhaustion, extended a gloved hand. Her face, framed by a fur-lined hood, was etched with worry. "Blake. Thank you for coming. We've been waiting." Her voice was low, strained. "The situation. It's worse than the preliminary reports suggest." "Worse?" I asked, pulling my own hood tighter, the wind whipping at my exposed cheeks. The air vibrated with a low thrum from the station's generators, a constant reminder of our fragile foothold in this hostile land. "The chamber. It's not a natural formation. And the preservation. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. Too perfect, almost. And the thaw, it's not stopping. We're losing the sight, rapidly." My gaze swept over the desolate landscape, the vast, unbroken white stretching to the horizon. Somewhere beneath that pristine, frozen surface lay a secret, a frozen tableau of a forgotten past. My determination solidified. I had to see it. I had to understand what the ice had finally decided to give up. I'd spent the flight mentally preparing, sifting through the limited intel the operations director had provided, a defunct Cold War program, an unexpected thaw, multiple mummified remains. But preparation rarely matched reality. The air here was dry, filtered, and carried the faint, metallic scent of disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed with an almost imperceptible whine, casting a harsh, even glow across the expansive, gleaming stainless steel surfaces. The room was vast, functional, and utterly devoid of warmth. Before me, centered on one of several specialized examination tables, lay the first of the unearthed individuals. A team of military personnel, silent and efficient, had managed the transfer from the remote Arctic site to this secure location. Their presence now was minimal, a single uniformed guard stationed by the sealed entrance, his gaze steady but unobtrusive. My primary assistant, a quiet but highly skilled technician, moved around the perimeter of the table, laying out my preferred tools, an array of fine probes, scalpels, magnifying lenses, and a suite of imaging devices. I appreciated her silent efficiency. I approached the table, my breath fogging slightly in the cold air. The body was encased in a thick, clear plastic shroud, the material condensation-free, a testament to the climate control. Beneath it, the contours of a human form were visible, the skin desiccated, pulled taut over bone, giving the features a gaunt, almost alien quality. This wasn't a simple frozen specimen, it was mummified, preserved by the unique conditions of its burial. The process of desiccation had arrested decay, but it also presented its own set of challenges. The technician nodded, already positioning the multispectral imager. I pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, the material snapping tight against my skin, a familiar ritual that always grounded me. As the imager swept over the body, its faint laser lines tracing across the ancient skin, I began my initial visual assessment. The individual appeared male, of medium height and build. But even through the mummification, details began to emerge that tugged at my forensic intuition. The posture was unnatural. Not the relaxed repose of someone succumbing to the elements, nor the violent contortion of a sudden, catastrophic impact. His left arm was bent sharply, hand raised as if to ward off a blow, fingers splayed. The right leg was twisted at an odd angle, the knee severely dislocated, evident even through the shrunken muscle and skin. This wasn't a peaceful death. This was a struggle. I leaned closer, my gaze fixed on the left forearm. The bone itself. I need a closer look. The technician brought over a high-resolution optical microscope, its articulated arm swinging smoothly into place. I peered through the eyepiece, adjusting the focus. The skin, though leathery, still held microscopic evidence. There were minute fractures along the ulna, consistent with a peri, and a strange, almost circular contusion on the radius, preserved by the desiccation. It wasn't a simple bruise, it had a distinct, patterned edge, like a pressure mark from a specific object. Thermal imaging, I requested, pulling back from the eyepiece. The technician switched modes. The thermal scan highlighted areas of increased density and subtle internal damage, even in a mummified state. The dislocated knee glowed with an eerie, diffuse heat signature, indicating significant trauma to the joint. And then, another detail caught my eye, something that made the hairs on my neck prickle. Embedded deep within the fabric of the heavy canvas sleeve, near the wrist, was a tiny, almost imperceptible shard. It had been overlooked during the initial recovery, probably dismissed as debris. But something about its sharp, almost crystalline appearance, and the way it caught the light, didn't sit right. "Magnify that," I instructed, pointing to the shard. The technician brought the microscope back, adjusting the magnification to an extreme level. Through the lens, the shard resolved into a complex, multifaceted structure. It wasn't organic. It wasn't rock. The edges were too precise, the internal structure too intricate. My mind raced, sifting through databases of materials, technologies. This was something modern. Too modern. This wasn't just an old body from a defunct program. The defensive wounds, the unique blunt force trauma, and now this anachronistic fragment, it all screamed foul play, and the timeline? The ice had preserved a deception. I straightened up, pulling my gaze away from the microscope. The technician looked at me, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "We need to extract that fragment carefully," I said, my voice low, "and send it for elemental analysis and structural identification. Priority 1. My eyes swept back over the mummified face, now a mask of ancient, silent suffering. But the evidence here, stark and undeniable, suggested something far more current, far more deliberate. This wasn't just a puzzle piece, it was a key, unlocking a door to a conspiracy that stretched beyond the frozen veil of history, into the unsettling present. I stood over the first mummified figure, my tools laid out meticulously on a steel tray beside the examination table. I preferred it this way, fewer distractions. My gloved fingers traced the contours of the first victim's ribcage, the skin like brittle parchment. The initial external examination had revealed no obvious signs of blunt force trauma or projectile entry. This individual, a man by the remains of his uniform, seemed to have simply stopped. A sudden, violent agony, perhaps, that seized him before he could react. Just as I prepared to make the first incision, the heavy blast door at the far end of the section rumbled open. Two burly station personnel, their faces grim, maneuvered a large, insulated stretcher through the opening. The operations director followed, his breath pluming in the cold air. "More discoveries, Raj," the operations director announced, his voice tight. The thaw accelerated overnight. "We found them in an adjacent chamber, sealed off, deeper within the complex." My gaze snapped to the stretcher. Beneath the thick thermal blanket, I could discern the unmistakable, horrifying outline of not one, but two more bodies. My initial assessment had been a single historical anomaly. Now, it was a mass grave, a silent testament to a forgotten catastrophe. "Bring them to the adjacent tables," I instructed, my voice flat, betraying none of the escalating dread I felt. This wasn't just a single incident, this was an event. As the new arrivals were carefully positioned, I moved between the tables, my focus sharpening. The second body, another man, wore a similar, albeit slightly different, uniform to the first. But it was the third that truly arrested me. This individual, smaller in stature, was dressed in what appeared to be civilian-issue Arctic gear, distinct from the military uniforms. And unlike the others, this one bore a clear, undeniable wound. A deep, linear fracture across the temporal bone, consistent with a severe impact. Not a fall. Not an accident. This wasn't natural, I murmured, more to myself than to the operations director, who stood watching, a flicker of unease in his eyes. A blow. Deliberate. The operations director stepped closer, peering at the third body. A struggle, then? Or an execution, I countered, my eyes scanning the other bodies again. The first man, his hands clenched. The second, lying in a contorted position that suggested a sudden collapse. And now this, a clear sign of violence. My internal hypothesis solidified. This wasn't just an accidental freezing. Something terrible had unfolded here. The civilian clothing suggested a non-military presence, perhaps a scientist or a specialist. The fracture pattern indicated a high-velocity impact from a blunt object. I noted trace evidence of what looked like dried blood, almost black against the preserved skin, near the wound. When was this section of the station sealed? I asked, not looking up from my work. According to the old logs, sometime in the late 60s, the operations director replied. After the incident, as it was vaguely referred to, all personnel were evacuated, and the program was officially decommissioned. The facility was then locked down, buried under the ice, and forgotten until the recent thaw. Late 60s. A secret research program. Multiple bodies, one with clear signs of interpersonal violence. The pieces clicked into place, forming a grim mosaic. An incident that left bodies behind, then a hurried evacuation and sealing, I mused aloud. And this individual was struck down. I paused, considering the implications. A bioresearch project, you said? The operations director nodded slowly. That's the prevailing theory, based on the limited declassified records. Something experimental. The exact nature was never revealed. My gaze fell upon a small, metallic canister clutched in the third victim's hand, almost hidden by the folds of his sleeve. It was a cylindrical object, corroded but still distinguishable. It wasn't a personal item. It looked like a containment vessel, albeit a small one. My stomach tightened. This, I said, carefully extracting the canister, is not standard field equipment. And this individual was trying to hold on to it. Or keep it away from someone. I turned the canister over in my gloved hand, careful not to disturb the fragile seal. A containment unit, for what? The operations director's mention of a bioresearch project echoed in my mind. A deadly pathogen, perhaps. Something that could have been weaponized. The implications were staggering. Not only had there been a violent internal conflict, a betrayal among the original researchers perhaps, but one of the victims had been carrying a potential biohazard. It was a ticking time bomb, buried in the ice for decades, now exposed, threatening to unleash its silent, deadly payload upon a world that had long forgotten its existence. The station's history wasn't merely context, it was a warning. And I was standing in the very heart of the disaster. The frigid air of the hidden chamber still clung to my memory, even hours later, as the roar of the transport aircraft faded behind us. The operations director had insisted on an immediate transfer once the preliminary scans of the canister hinted at its volatile contents. The facility was a stark contrast to the abandoned research station. Here, polished steel gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, and the air hummed with the low thrum of ventilation systems. I stood before the table, my gloved hands still tingling from the cold of the canister. The operations director, along with a senior security officer, watched from behind a thick glass partition, their faces grim. The security officer's gaze was particularly unsettling, a constant, evaluating stare. "Proceed, Raj," the operations director's voice crackled through the intercom. "Carefully." I nodded, my focus entirely on the containment unit. It wasn't just the age that struck me now, it was the subtle incongruity. The outer shell was undeniably old, scarred with the patina of decades, but a faint, almost imperceptible seam ran along one edge, too clean, too precise for its apparent vintage. My fingers traced it, a whisper of a modern weld beneath the ancient grime. Using specialized tools, I began the delicate process of breaching the outer casing. But as I worked, I found discrepancies. This wasn't just old tech. This was old tech modified. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool air. Each click of the specialized wrench echoed in the quiet room. Finally, with a soft hiss of released pressure, the outer shell came away. Beneath it, nestled in a layer of what looked like hardened gel, was a secondary, smaller container. This one was undeniably modern. Its surface was a matte black polymer, sleek and unblemished, a sharp contrast to the corroded metal that had encased it. This was a recent insertion. Raj, the operations director's voice was sharp with urgency. It's newer, I stated, my voice tight. The inner container. It's not from the same period. I carefully lifted the polymer capsule. It was cool to the touch, surprisingly light. A small, almost invisible indicator light on its side pulsed with a faint, steady green. It was active. My mind raced. Why would a modern container be sealed within an ancient one, buried in a supposedly abandoned Arctic station? I placed the polymer capsule on a separate sterile tray. My gaze swept the table, searching for any further clues. And then I saw it. Tucked into the hardened gel from the outer casing, a small, flat object. I carefully extracted it with tweezers. It was a memory chip, no bigger than my thumbnail, clearly a modern solid-state component. A data chip, I announced, holding it up for the cameras mounted in the room. And it's recent. The design, the manufacturing marks. This isn't decades old. My next move was to secure a specialized reader for the chip. The security officer behind the glass shifted, a subtle movement that caught my eye. His expression remained unreadable, but I felt a prickle of unease. He wasn't surprised enough. The chip reader whirred to life. A single file appeared on the screen, labeled log_arctic_ops_20xx_XX_XX. The date was less than a month ago. This was active. I clicked on the file. The header was clear, Station Log, Sector Gamma, Research Cadre Alpha. And below it, a list of equipment recently deployed: ruggedized comms unit, satellite uplink, portable power generators, biological containment suits, Type V, nutrient paste rations, current issue. They reactivated it, I murmured, the words feeling heavy in the sterile air. Someone reactivated the station. Recently. The operations director finally spoke, his voice losing its composure. Are you certain, Raj? This could be a misdirection, a plant. I shook my head, my eyes still fixed on the screen. The equipment listed, the dates on the log entries. This isn't a plant. This is an operational log. And the nutrient paste rations are a specific brand, only issued within the last year. These are fresh supplies. My gaze drifted back to the polymer capsule, still pulsing with its faint green light. What was inside? And why had someone gone to such lengths to conceal it within the relic of a defunct program? The implications were staggering. Someone was still up there, in that desolate Arctic expanse, continuing the work of a deadly bioresearch project. And they had been there very recently. The security officer moved, exiting the viewing chamber. I heard the faint click of the door as he left, presumably to make calls. The operations director remained. His face now a mask of genuine alarm. The Arctic wasn't just holding secrets of the past, it was incubating a threat for the present. The transport from the Arctic station was a blur of secured channels and hushed urgency. The polymer capsule, carefully isolated in a reinforced container, rode beside me, its faint green pulse a constant, unnerving companion. The implications of that pivot, as I'd called it, were now a heavy weight in my gut. We landed at a secure airbase, and from there, a heavily armored vehicle whisked me away to a location far from the public eye. The building that received us was a monolithic structure of reinforced concrete and tinted glass, bristling with surveillance cameras. Inside, the corridors were stark, devoid of natural light, and patrolled by silent security personnel whose gazes were sharp and unwavering. A forensic pathologist, a woman with keen eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, met me at the entrance to a pristine laboratory. Her name wasn't offered, nor mine, beyond my initial identification. Professionalism was a thick, unspoken shield. "Raj Blake," he acknowledged, his voice low. "We've prepped the containment suite. Level 4 protocols are in effect." I nodded, the words barely registering over the clamor of my own thoughts. The capsule was transferred into an advanced isolator unit, its contents still a mystery. My priority, however, was the tissue samples I'd extracted from the ancient mummified bodies. The answers to the Cold War riddle, I suspected, lay there first. Under the harsh glare of the examination lights, I began my work. The forensic pathologist assisted, her movements precise, her silence a comfortable counterpoint to my focused intensity. We processed the desiccated tissue, rehydrating minute sections, preparing slides for microscopic examination, and running genetic sequencing protocols. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the hum of the machinery and the soft clicks of the keyboard. Then, it appeared. On the high-resolution monitor, magnified thousands of times, were the culprits. Microscopic tendrils, aggressively invasive, had woven themselves through the cellular structure of the ancient lung tissue. They were unlike anything I'd encountered in my work with natural decomposition or known historical pathogens. The forensic pathologist leaned closer, her breath held. "Remarkable," she murmured, her voice tight with professional awe, but also, I detected, a tremor of unease. The sequencing results confirmed my initial visual assessment. This was a highly virulent agent, a bioengineered marvel of destruction. Its genetic signature was complex, featuring markers that suggested deliberate manipulation, even in its ancient form. It wasn't just a natural organism, it was a weapon. I traced a specific protein sequence, a unique identifier that screamed laboratory creation. Variola mortis, the system flagged it, a name I recognized from declassified but heavily redacted documents outlining theoretical bioweapons programs. This was it. The pathogen's signature. My gaze drifted to the polymer capsule, still sealed within its containment. These contained a clear, viscous fluid, along with a few desiccated cellular fragments, clearly not ancient. The initial tests confirmed the presence of Variola mortis again. But this wasn't the exact strain from the mummified bodies. This was something refined. The genetic markers showed a further evolution, a targeted modification. It was more potent, more stable, designed for maximum dissemination and lethality. The ancient strain had been a prototype, this was the perfected product. Among the cellular fragments, we identified human epithelial cells. Not just any cells, but cells showing active, aggressive infection by the modified pathogen. These weren't residual samples from a dormant weapon, these were from a current victim. Someone, somewhere, was already infected. Or perhaps, the capsule had contained a live culture meant for release. A critical piece of evidence surfaced during the materials analysis of the capsule's inner lining. A unique manufacturing residue, a synthetic polymer with a highly specific molecular structure, was embedded in the sealant. It wasn't generic. It was a proprietary compound, one whose formula I recognized from a heavily encrypted database I'd been granted access to during my initial Arctic briefing. It belonged to Novatech Global. My breath hitched. Novatech Global. The same corporation whose representatives had been so eager to assist with my investigation. The pieces clicked into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. They hadn't just acquired a facility, they'd acquired a weapon. And they had perfected it. The screen glowed, displaying the side-by-side genetic sequences, the ancient Variala Mortis and its modern, weaponized counterpart. Below it, the spectral analysis of the proprietary polymer from the capsule, a direct link to Novatech Global. This wasn't just a historical mystery anymore. This was a direct, active threat. And Novatech Global was at its core. The preliminary analysis confirmed my worst fears. The clear, viscous fluid from the vials wasn't inert. It swarmed with microscopic structures, unlike anything I had ever encountered in natural decomposition or ancient pathogens. These were too uniform, too perfectly symmetrical, exhibiting a crystalline precision that screamed artificiality. "Look at the cellular fragments," the forensic pathologist murmured, his voice tight. "Accelerated degradation. Complete cellular collapse in under an hour when exposed to this." I adjusted the focus, my jaw clenching. The desiccated fragments, clearly human, showed evidence of recent exposure to the fluid. Their cellular walls had ruptured, organelles dissolved, leaving behind only a fine, granular residue. It wasn't merely destructive, it was almost surgical in its efficiency. This wasn't a natural disease process, nor was it the slow decay of time. This was designed. Engineered. And it was terrifyingly potent. "It's not ancient," I stated, the words feeling heavy in the air. "It's contemporary." The pristine polymer casing, the carefully sealed vials, the advanced nature of the substance. This wasn't a relic of the Cold War program, it was a modern operation, using the historical site as a clandestine laboratory or storage. The hum of the ventilation system stuttered, then resumed, but the air felt heavier, charged with an unsettling premonition. "What was that?" the forensic pathologist asked, his eyes darting to the overhead fixtures. The screen of the electron microscope blinked out, plunging us into a momentary, disorienting darkness before the emergency lights kicked in, casting long, stark shadows. "Someone just hit our power grid," I said, moving swiftly to the communications console. My fingers flew across the keypad, attempting to raise anyone, anywhere. Nothing. This wasn't an accident. This was a direct, coordinated move. They knew we were close. They knew what we had found. "Try the secure line, Raj," the forensic pathologist urged, already grabbing a portable forensic kit, his movements precise and practiced. I tried the secure satellite phone, its battery indicator still showing green. No signal. Just static. The isolation was absolute. We were cut off. It escalated quickly, growing into a sustained, rhythmic pounding that seemed to originate from directly above us. "That's not an earthquake." Rattling the heavy steel door of our section. Dust rained down from the vents. The emergency lights flickered again, threatening to fail. We exchanged a look, grim understanding passing between us. My hands moved instinctively, sweeping the vials and the microscope's hard drive into a robust, shock-proof container. Every piece of evidence, every fragment of data, suddenly became a lifeline. We need to secure this data. Whatever this is, it can't get out, and they can't get their hands on our findings. The pounding intensified, now accompanied by the metallic groan of stressed structural elements. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and pulverized concrete. I could hear shouts. distant but growing closer, echoing through the facility's labyrinthine corridors. "What's the protocol for an armed breach in a restricted zone?" the forensic pathologist asked, his hand hovering over a locked cabinet containing emergency equipment. "Survival," I replied, my gaze fixed on the reinforced door, calculating its strength, its weaknesses. My forensic training had always been about deciphering the past, about meticulous reconstruction. Now, it was about immediate analysis, predicting the next move of a very present, very dangerous adversary. We were standing in the way, armed only with our intellect and a few fragile vials that held the key to a global catastrophe. The price of discovery, it seemed, was our very lives. Dust, fine and acrid, sifted from the ceiling panels, catching in the stark fluorescent glare. The distant shouts were no longer distant, they were right outside the heavy blast door that sealed my workspace. "What's the protocol for an armed breach?" a voice, tinny and panicked, screeched over the intercom before it cut out with a crackle of static. My gut clenched. Protocol, I thought, was currently being rewritten by a battering ram. The impact had thrown me against the reinforced steel table, sending my carefully arranged tools scattering. My head throbbed, a dull ache that mirrored the insistent thudding against the door. I scrambled, retrieving the microspectrometer and the secure data tablet. Every second counted. I had been hunched over the latest batch of samples, comparing the genetic markers of the pathogen recovered from the modern sabotage attempts with the ancient strains from the mummified remains. The similarities were chilling, confirming the Cold War pathogen's reactivation. But it was the differences that gnawed at me. A subtle, yet persistent, anomaly. I plugged the spectrometer into the tablet, the device's screen flickering as the facility's power grid wavered. Red emergency lights pulsed erratically, casting long, dancing shadows across the sterile walls. My fingers flew across the interface, pulling up the spectral analysis. The historical samples, preserved in the permafrost, showed a pristine, unmodified protein structure. The modern samples, however, contained a unique, synthetic stabilizer. A polymer, unlike anything naturally occurring, designed to enhance the pathogen's viability in warmer climates and airborne transmission. I cross-referenced the polymer's unique spectroscopic fingerprint against every known proprietary compound database I had access to, a vast, globally aggregated repository of industrial and pharmaceutical patents. The search ran for what felt like an eternity, the tablet's fan whirring frantically against the cacophony of the assault outside. Then, a match. Not a general one, but a precise, unmistakable hit. The polymer, designated Xenon 7, was patented. Not by a government entity, nor a conventional pharmaceutical giant, but by a private bioresearch firm, Aegis Solutions International. Aegis Solutions International. The name hit me with the force of another blow to the door. Publicly, they specialized in environmental remediation and advanced agricultural technologies. Privately, rumors had always linked them to ethically dubious genetic research and black market arms deals. But this was beyond rumor. I now realized with a jolt, was located eerily close to a remote Arctic drilling operation, a stone's throw from where the original discovery of the mummified bodies had been made. They hadn't preserved history, they'd exhumed it. This wasn't just corporate espionage for profit. This was a sophisticated, multi-layered operation. Aegis Solutions, acting as a proxy, was reactivating a dormant bioweapon for a rogue state, or perhaps a consortium of them. The goal, not to unleash an uncontrollable pandemic, but a controlled one. A weaponized pathogen, delivered with a precisely engineered stabilizer, designed to cause widespread panic, economic collapse. Then, crucially, to present Aegis Solutions as the sole provider of a miracle cure or a stabilization protocol. They would profit from the chaos they created. Their patron state would gain unprecedented political and economic leverage in a weakened global landscape. Global destabilization, engineered for profit and power. It was a terrifyingly elegant, monstrous plan. The blast door shuddered violently, a groan of tearing metal joining the relentless pounding. I heard the crackle of a breach charge being set. I had minutes, perhaps seconds. My findings were critical, but useless if they died with me in this collapsing facility. No direct external comms. All lines were jammed, the facility in full lockdown. But there was one option, a desperate, low-bandwidth channel usually reserved for catastrophic system failures or last-resort distress signals. It might be my only chance. I jammed a secure flash drive into the tablet's auxiliary port, rapidly compressing the spectroscopic data, the patent information for Xenon 7, and a brief, coded summary of my conclusions into a tiny, encrypted packet. Every byte was precious. I couldn't send the full report, but I could send enough for a competent intelligence analyst to follow the breadcrumbs. The air pressure in the room popped, a sudden, deafening bang as the blast door buckled inward with a tortured shriek of rending steel. Through the haze, I saw figures silhouetted against the emergency lights, armed and moving with ruthless efficiency. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I initiated the emergency transmission, targeting the nearest secure satellite uplink, praying it hadn't been compromised. The tablet screen showed a progress bar, agonizingly slow. Transmitting data packet. Estimated time, 17 seconds. 17 seconds. A voice, muffled by a respirator, barked an order. Secure the target. No witnesses. I hunched over the tablet, shielding it with my body, my eyes fixed on the progress bar, willing it to accelerate. The figures were advancing, their heavy boots thudding on the grimy floor. I could hear the clicks of safeties being disengaged. The smell of ozone was now overpowering, mingled with the metallic tang of fear. 12 seconds. A shadow fell over me. I braced myself, my fingers still pressing down on the tablet, a desperate prayer forming in my mind. This couldn't be for nothing. This couldn't be the end. A shadow, deep and menacing, blotted out the stark overhead lights. My fingers, still locked onto the tablet, twitched, the data of the Cold War-era program's final, horrifying experiment blazing across the screen. This couldn't be for nothing. This couldn't be the end. Let go of that, forensic specialist. The voice, sharp and devoid of warmth, belonged to the commanding officer. I didn't release the tablet. Instead, I met their gaze, my own conviction hardening. You're trying to replicate it, aren't you? What they created in that ice chamber? You found the protocols, the pathogen's dormant state, and you're reactivating it. The words tumbled out, a desperate attempt to stall, to provoke, to understand the depth of their depravity. A thin smile, devoid of humor, stretched across their face. Replication implies a copy, Raj. This is an improvement. A refinement. They gestured to two armed guards standing silently behind them, their weapons pointed at me. Now, release the device. We have a schedule to keep. My mind raced. The tablet held the key, the final piece of the puzzle, the specific environmental triggers that had kept the pathogen contained for decades. If I could just... A swift, brutal shove sent me sprawling. The tablet clattered, skittering across the frozen floor, its screen cracking, then winking out. The data was lost, or at least inaccessible. A wave of despair washed over me, quickly replaced by a surge of defiance. Get up, the commanding officer commanded, their voice a low snarl. You're coming with me. I was marched, not gently, through a labyrinth of sterile corridors. It hissed open, revealing a chamber unlike any I'd seen in the research. Station. Stainless steel gleamed under harsh, directional lights. A large, complex apparatus dominated the center, a gleaming, multifaceted contraption of polished chrome and reinforced glass, humming with a low, ominous energy. It wasn't organic, but it hummed with the promise of decay. On a nearby slab, laid out under a clear shroud, was one of the mummified bodies from the hidden chamber, its leathery skin and vacant eye sockets a stark reminder of the pathogen's devastating efficiency. "Behold, Raj," the commanding officer swept a hand toward the apparatus. "The delivery system. Designed for precision, maximum dispersal, and unparalleled lethality. The original pathogen, once thought neutralized, merely entered a state of cryogenic dormancy. My predecessors believed they had failed. They merely delayed the inevitable." My gaze was fixed on the apparatus. It pulsed with a faint, internal light. "You're going to aerosolize it," I breathed, the realization a bitter taste in my mouth. "That's why you needed the specific environmental data, to activate it without denaturing the viral structure." "Precisely." The commanding officer's eyes gleamed with a fanatical zeal. "The world has grown soft. Complacent. It needs correction. A reset. And this pathogen, carefully refined to target specific genetic markers, is the perfect instrument." They walked to a control panel, their fingers hovering over a series of brightly lit buttons. "The activation sequence is already initiated. In moments, the first dispersal will begin. A demonstration. A message." My eyes darted from the control panel to the mummified remains, then back to the gleaming apparatus. Forensic anthropology, my life's work, had always been about understanding the past, giving voice to the voiceless. Now, it had to be about stopping a future of silent screams. My mind raced, sifting through every detail I'd observed in the ice chamber, every fragment of data I'd managed to process before the tablet was snatched away. But what was its weakness? I remembered the subtle discoloration on the periphery of the mummified bodies, a faint greenish-blue tinge that spoke of microbial activity after the primary pathogen had done its work, but before the deep freeze. It was a common secondary decomposition indicator, often overlooked when focused on the primary cause of death. It's dependent on a specific, narrow range of conditions for its virulence to fully activate. You're missing a key component. A catalyst. The commanding officer paused, their fingers still hovering. Nonsense. The protocols are clear. Environmental stability, thermal regulation, atmospheric pressure. All accounted for. No, I pressed, stepping forward, drawing their attention. The guard shifted, but didn't move to stop me yet. The secondary decomposition. The specific microbial action present on the bodies. It wasn't random. It was a precursor, a facilitator. The pathogen needs a specific, common soil bacteria to fully transition from its dormant state to active virulence. Without it, it's just inert protein. Where is the catalyst? I pointed to the apparatus, then to the clean, polished floor. This facility is too clean. Too sterile. You've purged the very element it needs to become truly active. You have a delivery system for a dud. A flicker of doubt, brief but potent, crossed their face. They looked from me to the apparatus, then to the mummified body, their gaze searching for any sign of the greenish blue I'd mentioned. It was a bluff, a calculated risk based on a fleeting observation, but it was all I had. "You don't understand the science, Raj," they growled, but the conviction in their voice had wavered. They were thinking, calculating. The critical forensic application was working. "This is beyond your field." "My field is death, and how things break down," I retorted, taking another step. "And I see a fundamental flaw in your design. You've built a magnificent gun, but you've forgotten the bullet's primer. Their hands snapped down, not on the activation button, but on a different control, a diagnostic panel. The apparatus whirred, lights flashing, as they frantically checked internal sensors, searching for the missing piece, the catalyst I had just invented. It bought me precious seconds. My eyes scanned the room, searching for anything, a tool, a loose panel, a way to truly disable the device before they recovered from my gambit. The stakes had never been higher. My life, and potentially millions of others, hung on this fragile, forensic thread. My eyes scanned the apparatus, a frantic dance across the blinking lights and the adversary's desperate, fumbling fingers. They were searching for a non-existent catalyst, a phantom I'd conjured to buy myself time. My gaze snagged on a small, recessed button, barely visible beneath a tangle of diagnostic cables, the emergency purge override. It wasn't an activation switch, but a kill switch, designed to jettison the entire containment module into a failsafe chamber deep below. A desperate measure, but a final one. It's not there, the adversary hissed, their face contorted in frustration, their attention locked on the flickering screen. Where is it, Blake? What did you do? This was my moment. I lunged, not for them, but for the apparatus itself, my shoulders slamming into the reinforced casing. The adversary, caught off guard, stumbled back, their hand momentarily losing purchase. In that split second, my fingers scrabbled for the small, red button. It was stiff, designed to prevent accidental activation. I pressed, hard, feeling the satisfying click deep within the mechanism. A guttural roar of pure rage erupted from the adversary as the apparatus shuddered violently. A klaxon blared, piercing the frigid air, and a heavy clang echoed from below. The entire containment module, along with its deadly cargo, plummeted into the failsafe chamber, sealing itself with a final, echoing thud. The whirring stopped. The lights on the diagnostic panel died. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by my ragged breaths and the adversary's furious, frustrated curses. They stared at the now inert console, then at me, their eyes blazing with a hatred so profound it felt like a physical blow. Before they could move, heavy boots pounded down the corridor. A tactical squad, led by the commanding officer, burst through the entrance, weapons raised. The adversary, seeing the overwhelming force, went limp, offering no resistance as they were quickly subdued and secured. I stood there, trembling, the adrenaline rush receding, leaving me hollowed out. The air, once thick with unspoken dread, now felt cold, sterile. The commanding officer gave me a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement of the averted catastrophe. My work in the Arctic was done, but the real work, the painstaking, agonizing documentation, was just beginning. Here, under the unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights, the air was filtered and recycled, devoid of any scent save for the faint tang of disinfectant. I stood before a gleaming stainless steel table, a single specimen under my microscope. Not one of the mummified bodies from the Arctic, those were being handled by a dedicated team elsewhere, but a minute sample of the recovered pathogen itself, extracted from the containment module before its final plunge. My fingers, steady now, adjusted the focus knob. The image swam into clarity, a complex, crystalline structure, unlike any known virus or bacterium. A stoic individual with tired eyes, simply nodded. The catalyst I had bluffed about in the Arctic, the missing piece the adversary had so desperately sought, wasn't a chemical trigger. My detailed analysis of the pathogen's genetic markers, painstakingly cross-referenced with the recovered data logs from the defunct research station, revealed a terrifying truth. The pathogen was designed to undergo rapid genetic mutation when exposed to specific, extreme environmental shifts, like the sudden, unprecedented thaw in the Arctic. It wasn't just dormant, it was waiting. The mummified bodies weren't merely hosts, they were test subjects, their ancient physiology providing a unique, stable medium for the pathogen to lie in wait, adapting over decades, perhaps even centuries. The true catalyst was time and environmental change, transforming a dangerous bioweapon into something far more insidious, a self-evolving, highly resilient biological agent. This revelation was the core of the conspiracy. The adversary and their hidden network weren't just trying to unleash a weapon, they were trying to activate a superweapon, one that could learn, adapt, and potentially bypass modern countermeasures. They had been searching for a specific environmental signature, a catalyst that would kickstart the next stage of its evolution. My bluff had diverted them, forcing them to look for something chemical, something they could control, buying us the critical seconds needed to contain it. I leaned back from the microscope, the weight of this discovery pressing down on me. The human cost of such hubris was immeasurable. The mummified individuals, once vibrant people, had been reduced to biological experiments. And the adversary, a modern echo of that same misguided zeal, had almost detonated it. My role now was to ensure this evidence was meticulously documented, every slide photographed, every genetic sequence mapped, every log entry correlated. This wasn't just for a future prosecution, though that would come. This was for the world, for humanity to understand the depths of what had been created, and the vigilance required to prevent its recurrence. My journey from the tranquil halls of academia to the frozen wastes and now to the sterile chamber had irrevocably changed me. I was no longer just an observer, an interpreter of the past. The world outside was reeling, grappling with the news of the discovered pathogen and the conspiracy behind it. My work, however, was far from over. It was only just beginning.